Hello everyone, my name is Gary Waterman. I'm a former police officer, a Christian and a victim of this international government fraud. It's the 18th of May 2024. If you haven't seen my other videos, you can go and check them out on YouTube on @garythetruthsetsusfree. That is being suppressed and videos are being deleted sometimes, but you can also look at stuff on my Telegram channel, which is the description. It is going to be within the description of this video. Also within the description, it's very important, there is a document file link. Very important because there's evidential research documents within there. If you don't understand this, you can start looking at the BCP Council one, followed by the World Trade Center disaster document, where there's a guide within those documents. I do suggest you download the documents within this file, and many of you, if not all of you, because if anything happens to me or social media is taken down, we need to know that evidence has been secured by others as well. Now, it's already backed up and secured in various locations with me and others. However, let's get it right out there as much as we can. And that document file link is literally around the world. So many people have it. They're now building their own evidence. They're challenging their MPs, forming groups, etc. And many people are wanting to put a stop to this as soon as possible. Now, this email was sent today. You can see on the right hand side there, it was about 20 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago, 18th of May 2024. And the heading is International Government Fraud, Child Trafficking, Vaccines and Directed Energy Weapons. You can see that it's from me. There is my email address in the middle of the screen. Now, this big black section is where I've redacted the emails or the recipients' email addresses of where this email has been sent. But if anything happens to me, then the full email will be disclosed to the general public with all of those email addresses on there. Now, the reason I've redacted it is because those email addresses were sent to me by somebody else on the back of another email, and I don't know if all of them are publicly accessible emails, so I just need to be careful. Some of them do look like they're not. I don't know for sure, so that's why I've redacted them. So let's look at the actual main body of the email. And you can see there's around 200 emails within the black section. And it says, good afternoon. It should say good evening. Sorry, I got that wrong. The correspondence of this email had previously been sent to me in relation to an apparent case against genocide, or in relation to genocide by the Canadian government, and the recipients appeared to include members of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and the FBI, among others. So there, just to give you an idea of some of the groups that are within this email that I've sent, they include those groups. Now, they appear to be authentic email addresses. And this, just in relation to this first bit, the genocide was in relation to the vaccines, which does tie into everything I'm going to be talking about. If you're not already aware of me, I'm Gary Waterman, and I'm a former UK non-substantive police sergeant with 18 years service, a Christian and a victim of this, the largest financial crime in the history of mankind, and involving our own governments and their organisations. You have possibly seen from my videos and associated documents that there is now irrefutable evidence circulating the globe showing that the nation's governments, their organisations, the Crown, and those controlling the systems in place have been involved in the method of international fraud, closely associated to child trafficking, abuse, and apparent murder being used to ensure that it remains in place. This started to become apparent in late September 2022. At around this time, I acquired forged bank documents that appeared to have been produced by the banks and were being used by a company for which I was a director. This, along with my former police force confirming in writing that they were allowing a loophole to an investigation for these documents to be produced and used in circulation, as well as the UK Home Office refusing to intervene, heightened my concerns of the scale of what I was uncovering. Sorry, I should have done some more full stops in all of this. Not the best at grammar and spelling. This eventually led to evidence that the fraud had emanated from the forgery of the company registration systems, forgery of incorporation documents attached to those systems to create illegal entity companies, and the forged bank documents being used by those companies to falsify their company figures and conceal the real amounts in offshore accounts. You might have to read that a couple of times to get your head around it. I understand it because obviously I've been doing it for 2 years now. These are serious crimes under the 2006 Fraud Act, which we are led to believe is real. And the legislation confirms that the forgery only has to cause a risk of a financial loss to victims, or an unlawful gain to those involved for the offence to be complete. Okay, so you don't have to have a loss or a gain, it's just the risk. This forgery, it of course creates that risk because the illegal companies are being allowed to trade with no legal implications for any criminal activity. The relevant 2006 Fraud Act legislation can be found within the document file link at the bottom of this email. So the link I've just told you about, I'm sending it to them as well. Government officials, some members of these companies, their legal teams and their financial advisors will very likely have known what they were part of and are therefore complicit to these crimes. I've been emailing 650 so UK members of Parliament repeatedly over this. My local MP is refusing to respond and is shown as being closely linked to the fraud. I have, however, received one fairly recent response from an MP that I believe rightly undermines the UK government and its supply of weapons to Israel and calls for an immediate ceasefire. The fraud is, of course, significantly associated to the genocide in Gaza. That's my feeling, is that it's a genocide, and the theatre of the Ukrainian war, which we'll talk about in a minute. It is quite relevant to note that it is now open knowledge that conflicts enable the capture of orphan children into the child trafficking system, and I suspect that this is actually a significant motive for these conflicts in the first place, only emphasised by the exposure of this fraud. And of course you will have the financial motive because you pump taxpayers' contributions through into defence contracts, and then obviously they could be trying to justify that there's a risk of a war or a conflict, so we need to put more money into the taxation system. And of course then the forged bank documents can come in through these weapon companies. They use those forged bank documents to falsify the company's figures and defraud the general public that way through the defence contracts and the taxation system. Anyway, I'll read on. Research shows that Ukraine is heavily linked to child trafficking, and I recently discovered that a Kyiv company links very quickly to my company and a parliamentary island group linked to Ghislaine Maxwell and the apparent abuse and murder of children on UK islands. This system links closely throughout the evidence to Robert and Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, Max Clifford and Jimmy Savile, as well as evidence of child trafficking, abuse and the apparent murder of children within the UK care system, and also links to the police and politicians as being involved and to international child trafficking. The system is destroying the very fabric of truth and moral integrity and has enabled the systematic control of nations' governance through apparent deceit, misinformation, and very sinister means, and the suffering of many innocent children. Many will be benefiting financially from this, mainly those who are shareholders of businesses or those in positions of authority. But it is clear that it will be victimising most people, and it is undoubtedly. Can you hear that lovely bird in the background? Sorry. I've got the door open on the van. It's a beautiful evening, and there's the birds just singing away. But it is clear that it will be victimising most people, and it is undoubtedly why there is such a disparity between the rich and poor. It is a crime against humanity to cause psychological torture through financial suffering, which is covered by Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights. As I am sure you're aware, financial suffering causes depression, addictions, whether it be alcohol and drugs, family separations, self-harming and suicides, including by children. This system appears to have been utilised since the creation of Companies House in 1844, and the Crown, the legal system, and most aspects of society, including banks, mortgages, I found out recently, guys, basically as well, mortgages, insurances, pensions and healthcare appear to have been set up around this with the purpose of exploiting, defrauding and controlling the general public, including its population. Now, if you think about it, how can insurances and pensions and healthcare be used in the system of fraud? Well, it's quite simple. If you have companies linked to those organisations that have access to the forged bank documents and they are illegal entity companies, everyone's paying into, or many people are paying into pensions. Many people are paying into insurance policies, most of which are never even utilised. So this system of frauds allows those people to take the money through a criminal process from these companies and then send it into offshore accounts. Okay, so and I'm finding now, and I have actually ever since, but I haven't really focused on it, that you have mortgage companies, insurance companies, pension companies that are false entity companies. So the incorporation document clearly doesn't match the register. Anyway, so we'll come to the population part of that in a minute. But here, this is important. The Freemasons and Rothschilds appear to be heavily associated as being behind these crimes. And my latest research shows that the Freemasonic Society are even linked to illegal entity companies that are possibly defrauding the public services through their pension schemes, as well as being closely linked to the child trafficking system and the Crown. Now, I haven't publicised that on a video, but you can see it if you look at my latest directed energy system concerns document, which is in the document file link. Scroll down through it and you will see Freemason companies linked through to the public services pensions companies, which all links to fraud that then links to the child trafficking. And you'll see on the same document it links to the royal family and also my company through JP Morgan and other connections. Okay, so anyway, any of you that are in the public services, that affects you. This criminal system is linked to most financial scandals, including the PPE scandal, the recently publicised Royal Mail scandal, the Betsy Cadwallader University scandal, the David Cameron Greensill scandal, the Ben Houchen Michael Gove scandal, the FTX scandal, and many more. So I'd just like to say, actually, I didn't mention it in the email, I forgot, should have done. But where there's a pooled pension fund as well that's linked to this and all the other pension companies. Now that's important because if they're controlling the population, that gives them a motive to reduce the population, because it means they have the ability to cash in on the money that everyone has been paying in for years into their pension funds, and they won't be accessed by those persons because they will no longer be alive. Okay, I'll read on. It relates heavily to the COVID vaccine situation because all vaccine companies appear to have been created as illegal entity companies or be closely associated with them. Now, I'm pretty sure, I'll have to look back, I'm pretty sure Moderna, AstraZeneca and Pfizer all have illegal entity companies. The same can be said of most weapons manufacturing companies, which means that every piece of ammunition fired could be considered illegal due to the causation of a crime continuing. For example, if the ammunition is paid for by money obtained from the public through a criminal process such as this, as appears to be the case, that money can then not be used for any legal acquisition. It all becomes a crime. That's absolutely true. So you can't go and steal money from a bank, use that money to buy something then lawfully. Whatever you buy, that's an illegal acquisition because the money has been obtained illegally. So the causation continues through. It is very apparent that the World Trade Center disaster links in almost every way to this fraud, including the apparent forgery of documents to try and hide links to the disaster, the UK government, the fraud, and the child trafficking through the apparent consideration of Western governments to reduce the age of sexual consent to 10. In fact, despite there being over 5 million companies registered with the UK Companies House system, research from the World Trade Center disaster links to my company within 6 companies, but there are many quick links, far too many to be a coincidence. It is highly likely with this and others evidence that the World Trade Center disaster was a collaboration by the UK, US and other nations to somewhat reset the financial system and trigger oil control in the Middle East and a war on terror to eventually lead to digital control, including that of the financial system, along with the removal of cash to ensure that the sinister fraud is almost unstoppable. Now we know that they're expediting that. They're trying to do that within a year to 2 years, probably less. Remove cash. We're in trouble if that happens. It is very clear from the evidence that the controlled mainstream media has been used to provide disinformation to the general public around the world to try and ensure that this fraud and its associated sinister activities are not exposed. This has failed. I don't know what I put there. This has failed because it is now fully exposed, and it is clear that this is a collaborative effort by the World Economic Forum and nations' governments against their general public, including Russia, Ukraine, the UK, US, the Crown, and the intelligence agencies with connections with my company to Ian Fleming, MI6, and JP Morgan banking fraud. In other words, now that evidence is there, it's very clear that everything is a collaborative effort to do what they're doing, including to the directed energy weapon systems that we'll come to now. This includes an apparent collaborative effort to create directed energy weapon systems that appear to have been incorporated into the 5G network system and the low emission zones set up around populated areas of the world. Now, why would you have, think about this, at a time of supposed conflict and tension, why would you have Russia, my company, the UK, the US, Ukraine, other nations collaboratively linked very closely to the same weapons manufacturing companies? You wouldn't, unless the whole thing we're seeing about the conflict is a theatre. It just wouldn't be happening. I suspect that this, along with the publicised COVID virus outbreak and its vaccines, were part of an elaborate plan to depopulate the earth and remove those who oppose any proposed government policies and maintain full control of the world's finances through digital means. Shockingly, there is also concerning information to suggest that there may have been, as a recent consideration being given for a collaborative weapons strike, including Russian, Ukrainian, UK, Germany and US against England in an effort to justify a financial reset to a form of digital control and remove the company's house registration system based in Cardiff. Now, what is it that makes me think that? Well, the main thing is we now know that there's collaborative effort in a time of conflict with the same weapons companies. So we're being deceived in relation to what the media shows. Now, fairly recently, I can't remember when, December, January, Mr. Putin publicised the fact that he would consider a nuclear attack on the UK with everything that's going on in Ukraine. Around this time, and I do suggest you go and look at this. You can corroborate and verify everything I'm showing you. Don't just take my word for it. You can go and look at, I believe it was in January, that the Trident nuclear submarines that we have misfired 2 missiles. Okay, they fell into the sea. This was openly publicised by all mainstream media. Then I know for a fact is controlled through this system of fraud. So I've looked at the mainstream media companies, and they all go back to the same companies. They're all linked together to fraudulent entity companies, also linked through to the child trafficking as well, at some point or another. So the question has to be, why would the government openly publicise that we cannot retaliate with our only method of retaliation in a nuclear war, by the way? So the Trident nuclear submarines are the UK's only defence, or retaliatory defence, shall we say, to a nuclear strike. And yet our government chose to publicise that fully. I mean, it's almost on every mainstream media. You can go and look at it at a time when Putin was threatening to send nuclear weapons to the UK. You would not do that strategically unless you were trying to justify that we couldn't retaliate in a nuclear strike if there was an attack on the UK. It just wouldn't make sense unless that was the reason. I've spoken to a lot of people about this. No one can think of any other reason. I then had information. Now, please don't panic about this, because, there's no hard set facts in relation to this. This is just my theory based on the information that there's there, and it has to be considered. But someone who has worked out a coded system that these people may be using, which is similar to like, this is where you're getting into the realms of I can't verify or corroborate this at all. Okay, but a similar calendar system that Nostradamus used, I don't even understand it, to be honest with you. It has been explained to me, and I've seen lots of documents by this incredible person that's done it. But Milton Keynes focused significantly on this person's research, but he didn't know why. So then I looked at Milton Keynes, and it's pretty much central to England. It's almost the central point. It's slightly closer to London than the centre. But strategically, it would be a place where, if the right weapon was used, you could reset the financial system. You could then implement a digital currency system, which would enable this crime to be unstoppable. And you could also take out the company's house registration system that is based in Cardiff at the same time. This whole system is a travesty to any decency and morality of humanity. Those involved in this are far worse than any of those I dealt with in my time in the police, and I am unsure how they are able to sleep. The people of the world cannot accept that those supposedly there to guide and protect them are basing their governance on a criminal system, and where their children's futures appear to be deliberately being subjected to a risk of physical and psychological harm. Therefore, they are now having to consider peaceful, strategic and coordinated efforts to prevent it from continuing. Sadly, it is clear that those that have been in control of the nation's governance can no longer be trusted. It is unfortunate that this is having to be considered, as this could be avoided had the World Economic Forum and government officials responded and considered implementing something similar to what now appears to be the only way to resolve this: a complete change in the system and those leading, guiding and supporting the people. These are some of the necessary measures that spring to mind. This is just my personal opinion, and I'm repeating myself, but I'm going to read it anyway so you know what's in the email. Number one, a transparent taxation system at source. An example of this would be publicly viewable government bank account systems showing, for example, the 6th monthly collective income of council tax and the referenced expenditure from that account. Taxation requests, I believe, should fluctuate based on any accrued amount, allowing a sinking fund for any national eventualities. So that sinking fund would be, again, publicly viewable, so the public can see what is that sinking fund, what is that surplus of tax. We maintain that. If we exceed it, or it's being exceeded, then you just reduce people's tax. If it starts becoming less, then we slightly increase people's tax until we get to the point where, okay, we can. That would be a transparent way and a common sense way that I can see that would enable a fair system for everybody. Anyway, number two, full verification of every person and every address involved in new and existing company incorporations. At the moment, there's been no verification whatsoever since 1844 for the company registration through Companies House, probably what other countries' company registrations as well. Now, why wouldn't you do it? They know full well that enables a system of money laundering and criminal activity, because if you're not using the right names and addresses, how can you hold these people accountable at all? You can't. They know that, and they've done it deliberately. Number three, the implementation of strict government legislation with significant consequences to prevent any member of parliament or those in position of authority from making any decisions for their own or affiliated personal gains. The people must be shown that the decisions that affect them are being made for the good of the majority of people and the environment. Number four, public commitment to ensure that there is no further move towards a cashless society without a method of being able to withhold taxes as a way of peacefully protesting against possible criminal government, and still having the ability of a tangible payment system to survive in the event of a freeze of funds. In other words, we can't be in a position where if we've got a criminal government that wants to do something that it knows most people won't agree with, the people need to be able to stand up peacefully and say, look, if you do this, we're not going to pay any tax, because we can't be having a government and paying for a government that's bringing in things that's against what's in the interest of the public as a whole or the environment, especially if it's very sinister, such as reducing the age of sexual consent to 10. Well, that's my personal opinion. Number five, the implementation of a transparent financial system surrounding real estate real estate management to ensure that all leaseholders and shareholders are suitably protected against exploitation and fraud. Number six, the staged resignation of all members of Parliament, their advisors, chief constables, police and crime commissioners, and heads of all government organisations still in their positions since the fraud was reported in September 2022. Now, I believe they have to do this because nobody is going to trust any of those in a position of power that should have been speaking up about this when they haven't. I've emailed 650 MPs. I've had no responses saying, yeah, we're going to look into this. Yeah, we're going to raise this. Not one of them has said that. Not one of them. I'm getting the same response from everyone else that has contacted all of their MPs, that have contacted the police and crime commissioners, etc. None of them are saying they'll look into it, they'll deal with it. It's not good enough. Nobody's going to trust these people now. They've been in a position to change it, highlight it, address it. They haven't. They need to be gone. I can't see any other way around that. Number 7, of course, compensation to the people regarding this fraud needs to be considered, as well as a full public judicial inquiry into those having been driving and controlling this criminal system. Now, that's a big ask, but I think the people are going to demand something like that, aren't they? There has to be. It might be that we have to accept that it's so big and there's so many people involved that is just not feasible, unfortunately, providing we have the full cooperation and everyone assisting with a transition to a transparent system. Now, there'll be lots of people that will be demanding that these people are brought to account, and particularly those that have been driving this forward and allowing this system of fraud to continue for so long. And the compensation, obviously, I mean, you're talking a lot of compensation. This is worth multi-millions of fraud. Oh dear, my spelling's terrible. The World Economic Forum and governments appear to be unwilling to do any of this. And why wouldn't they if they value truth, transparency, trust, integrity, and accountability, all being essential qualities for those in positions of responsibility and the safety of millions? It appears that members of the World Economic Forum are concerned about the current population of the world and the effect this may be having on the planet or them personally. If there is any truth in this concern, and I'm saying if, okay, it should be made clear that this is the case, and they need to understand that there is no need to consider any potential sinister methods of population control, as appears to be the case. This criminal system appears to have fueled and incentivized a population increase through the personal or affiliated gains of the fraudulent management of the taxation system. Now, let me just elaborate on that. This system of fraud has literally incentivized having more people, because you more people, you have more tax. We know that the benefit system has actually, from my knowledge and research, appears to have incentivized people to have more children, especially those within low income brackets, low income earnings, because people seem, the opportunity has been there where if you have more children, you have more money than you would be able to manage a job, etc. Okay, so it's incentivized having more children. If there is any truth in the concern of the population growth, this can be very likely be managed through transparency and periodic incentivized choice of those considering having children. Now, there's various things that could be discussed and considered around that, but the important thing is, I believe, it can be done through transparency and incentivized choice, not forced control, but incentivized. So there'll be an incentive, whether it be a financial incentive to not have children for 5 years, for example, or if the population requires it, you then revert to an incentive to have children, or something similar to, I'm not saying that's exactly, but there's definitely something you could do that will be transparent and still allow choice. It is clear that the governance of our nations is completely lost in a battle against the moral conscience, and that most are choosing a path of sin. I don't want to get too spiritual, but don't forget, these people, if you look at the history, it suggests that there is a spiritual motive, and not a good spiritual motive, behind a lot of this. I'll read on. History suggests that this situation has been in the making for many centuries, and that everything is coming to a head. It is no coincidence that the public exposure of this evidence is happening now, at the very time that it is needed to prevent the full implementation of any of these plans. You only have to look at me, a fairly insignificant man in a van that barely drives, with just a mobile phone. But through a perseverance in faith, through truth and accountability, I've been able to expose, with the help of some others, undeniable evidence of decades of corruption, which has very likely been the root cause of most of the problems on the planet for decades. It's not too late for us all to be saved through disclosure of the truth and true repentance and an opportunity for change, including those involved in this. I've been placed in significant danger by the very organisations where I worked, and I suspect an attempt has been made on my life. You look at my other videos about that. But just to summarise quickly, information about my investigation was leaked to a named primed suspect by my very own force that I used to work for. Of course, that puts me in danger. And then, despite loads of things happening that suggested there could be a risk to me, the Independent Office for Police Conduct still shared my sensitive statement back with the force where there was clear information, my previous force, where there's clear information suggesting that they were actually involved in the fraud. So they've put me in serious danger. The attempt on my life, I believe, was, or I suspect, shall I say, was an attempted poisoning whilst I was parked up in Barnsley, which you'll see in a document about it's actually within the Rishi Sunak document on part 7, I believe. Those involved in this may still be able to silence me, but they can no longer silence the truth. It's over. And the world cannot return to this system of suffering through criminal governance and child abuse again. Those involved in this need to realise that they are far more at risk than anyone else or everyone else. And if they want to save themselves and humanity in the process, they need to desist immediately and help in a transition to a new system. There are various links below where you can reference some of the evidence to my claims and see other information. Truth, transparency and trust must prevail. And then I've just put links to my YouTube channel, Telegram, document file link, links to some of my interviews, corroborative information. I mean, there's loads, isn't there? You can see so many videos, but I've just put some there. And at the bottom, I've put a link to the possible explanation as to how we got here historically. Sorry about the spelling mistakes. I don't know why they didn't. I did this on a document and they didn't come up with being a mistake. But I'm not great at this. Thanks very much for listening, and God bless you all. Bye. Oh, just quickly, I'll put a copy of this email in the document file as well. God bless you. Bye.